Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat. And my wonderful guest today is Jennifer Rawlinson, who is the director and lead trainer of Flourishing Mind. You're a mental health first aider trainer, aren't you, Jennifer? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, lovely to have you on board, and really appreciate having to have the opportunity to have a chat with you today. Now, I know you're a mental health first aider trainer, but tell us a little bit about what you do and the work that you've done and people you work with and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. So I would say that I've got a real specialism, particularly in workplace mental health and wellbeing training. So a lot of this stems from my 13-year corporate background. So a lot of sort of hands-on experience being a people leader when I was in that environment. And it was that experience actually that kind of sparked me to set up my own business, providing that training and education for workplaces, specifically around mental health and well-being. So I help organisations not just with mental health first aid training, but other types of training and workshops dependent on what that particular organisation is needing. So it may be, for instance, that actually it's a piece of work with their line managers, so understanding things like reasonable adjustments, what their obligations are as an employer, through to sort of smaller, shorter workshops on topics such as stress, resilience, those kinds of things. So really giving people those hands-on tools and techniques that they can implement, all with a focus on improving their well-being. And I think for me, what's really important is understanding if the organisation I'm working with has got a wider wellbeing strategy in place, because it's what happens after the training that's important, not the day
Yeah,
or 2 days of training that you have.
yeah. No, that's brilliant, and I mean, it's very timely as well. Not that it's never been timely, but I suppose more so today, given our present climate and knowing the concerns that people have about how are things going to pan out over the next few months, and for them, the future. I would imagine there'll be a lot of stress and anxiety. What would in terms of people finding themselves in that position, what would your sort of advice be to them? What would you kind of things would you say to them? Because I know mental health is vital for us to be able to function fully in whatever capacity we're in. But in order to look after that, there are things that we need to do. And when we're being pressed like we are at the moment as a society, as a nation, and globally as well, it's just knowing some of the things that they can do to help themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's sort of two aspects to it. I think firstly, people actually acknowledging the way that they're feeling right now, and what they're experiencing. I'm finding that there's a danger that people feel, well, everybody's in the same boat, we're all in that same position, that people can feel reluctant to either talk to other people about it or acknowledge themselves. They just think, I've just got to get on with it. And almost ignoring some of the signs that might show that they're struggling, but also that reluctance to talk to other people because they
Yeah.
think that, well, I'm not special. Everyone's going through difficulties right now.
Yeah, but it's like you say, it's important that people recognise the fact that even though others may well be going through it, that doesn't mean to say that we don't ask for help, that we don't find somebody we can talk to or share something with. There's that saying, isn't there? A problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah.
Well, in some ways, talking about it, and I know from my own experience, being able to have somebody I can trust,
Mhm.
that I could talk to, was a help in itself. But
Mhm.
sometimes we need a little bit more than that, don't we?
Mm.
It's like recognizing the signs when actually we're not in a really good place, and what would those signs be that we're looking at or looking at in each other,
Mhm.
and what kind of things could we do really to either help ourselves or help another when those signs are being in front of us.
Yeah, I think, and it's an interesting question, because I think when you're talking about the signs that somebody might be struggling or your own mental health might be deteriorating, it's almost like we skip those early stages and we're more focused on things like a persistent low mood or feeling down. But actually, there are earlier signs that we kind of not well, yeah, we probably do ignore them. They're more subtle. So I would be saying, looking out for things like people being more snappy, that
Yeah,
they've got less patience, more agitated, and you might recognize that in yourself as well. But also other things like, are you making more mistakes? Are you
yeah,
forgetting things? Are you finding yourself distracted? And often that's down to the magnitude of things that you're dealing with mentally in all
mm,
different aspects of your life. But actually, when we are under stress and we've got more pressure, that this is where we can start to forget these little things. And if it's just a
yeah,
day-to-day tiny thing that we're forgetting, we just almost let it go unnoticed. And similarly in other people, if are you finding that you're getting frustrated with someone because they're forgetting things or making mistakes, but actually that could be a real early indicator that
yeah,
perhaps they're struggling as
yeah. And I suppose for an employer as well, that's a big issue, isn't it? Because you want people to be fully engaged and as productive as they could be, and that's good for the business. But clearly, if people are suffering some of these symptoms you talk about the forgetfulness, distraction, snappiness in the workplace is going to cause an atmosphere that's really not helpful for teams to function together. And if somebody is being forgetful, I know the first thing I've heard this from some people. The first thing they think about is, "Well, I'm getting older. Is it the onset of dementia or something like this?" Now, I'm not belittling that in any way, but it's interesting, isn't it? How we begin to take something and catastrophize,
mm-hmm.
and yeah, and then it leads down all manner of routes. But the fact that if you are being distracted, one, you can't really focus on your work as
Mm-hmm.
much as you're able to do, but also at the same time, there's clearly something there that is on your mind that's actually causing that distraction.
Mm-hmm.
And the propensity then, as typical sort of Brit, is, well, I'm just going to suck it up.
Mm-hmm.
i'm just
Yeah,
gonna I'm just gonna keep pressing on.
yeah.
And actually sometimes it's right to say, like you were saying, it's right to acknowledge, do you know what, I'm not doing well at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
um, I need some help.
Yeah, and do you know what? On that note, I am a huge advocate for mood journals.
Mm,
Just taking that time every single day just to assess, where is your mood? Where has your mood been today? How have you been feeling? What types of thoughts have you been having? And you don't have to spend hours and hours writing about it or thinking about it, but it is just taking that time daily to reflect, because as human beings, we're very good at just being on autopilot, getting through each day. And actually, we can go for a significant period of time not in a good place, but managing to get by on a day-to-day basis. And as we
yeah,
do
yeah,
that, it's
yeah,
working.
yeah,
For me, mood journals, just taking that reflection time, are a really good way of actually highlighting these things to ourselves much quicker
yeah.
as
that's
well.
that's that's a really interesting point you raised, because it's about learning to be more aware of yourself, isn't it? I
Yeah,
mean, how many of us actually take time out just to think about me?
yeah.
Because oh, I can't possibly do it. Well, that's a bit arrogant, isn't it, or something like this. But actually, self-awareness is very powerful. I mean, I cover this in the training I do
Mhm.
around finances. and what drives our choices and behaviours. And the fact that 80% of our decision making in life per se is made out of an emotional state. And suddenly you think, hang on a minute, if I don't understand myself, if I don't understand my emotions, I can't articulate them or pinpoint what they are, then how do I know whether they're affecting me in a good way or a bad way when it comes to making important decisions in life? And I would imagine you see this in terms of when people are struggling somewhat, but still trying to, battle through, and it's not necessarily helping them.
It's not, no. And do you know what? A lot of the time as well, it's unconscious that people have just not realised that that's how they are, because they're kind of on this, alarm goes off, you get up, you go to work, you get home, pick the kids up from school, do what, make the tea, get, go to bed, alarm goes off, you get up. You can see how we can survive for really long periods of time, not in a good place, because we have to, because on the treadmill of life. And this is where, for me, the mood journaling comes in, because it forces you just to take a few minutes just to pause and think. You're absolutely right. Our thoughts, the nature of our thoughts, influence the way that we behave and our decision making. But I think when you're in the thick of it as well, you don't even realize it.
No. And that is so true. And there's been often cases where I've talked with people who have made important decisions in the midst of that moment, and then regretted the decision they've made, and it's hung round them like a black cloud. And so I always say to people, it's really important you never make an important decision when you feel that you're not quite yourself. You're not, you're feeling maybe stressed, or you're tired, or something like this, that you take time out to think about it, perhaps, especially if it's a financial decision, but any important decision in life, it's really key to understand where you're at that point in time. And the feelings of guilt that people may experience when they take time out for themselves, that part we need to actually change the narrative, don't we? We need to say to people, in actual fact, that is a really good thing that you take time out to think about yourself. Because if you're not in a good place, how can you help somebody else?
Absolutely. That goes back to that whole analogy, doesn't it? Put your own oxygen mask on before you help.
Yes. It is. It is.
You're not going to be able to do that unless you're in a good place. And similarly as well, if you're not looking after yourself, as you've mentioned before, whether that's in the workplace or whether it's at home, it's going to be affecting relationships, it's going to be affecting your decisions, which can then have those longer term knock-on effects. So I think this whole thing around self-care is really important, but also defining what that means, because so many times I talk to people who say, I know I need to do it, I know the types of things that I should be doing for my own well-being, but I just don't find the time to fit it in. I'm too busy. And this sort of perception that we need an hour to do an exercise class, or it's kind of like these big chunks of time, but actually in reality you could just take 10 minutes a day, 5 minutes a day at regular intervals. And it's about how you weave it into your day-to-day, not sort of putting these expectations that you've got loads of time to put to one side to indulge in yourself, because often we don't have that time available. But it doesn't mean that we can't do it. And I think it's looking at, what works for you. I had a really interesting conversation actually with a lady not so long since, and she was talking about her self-care. And I'd asked them to share what they do, but I'd made the point of saying, don't think you've got to come up with a textbook answer. I want to know genuinely what helps you. And what she said was, at her workplace, lots of people car shared to and from work. And she said, and that's brilliant, and it's better for the environment and it helps relationships. But she said for her, she's identified that she needs to do that journey alone, because it helps her focus as she's driving into work, but it also helps to sort of decompress as she's driving home from work. And she's made that decision
Yeah.
around her boundaries, that actually doing that commute on her own, that is her self-care. And I said, that's
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really interesting point because I've heard several people talk about this. Something that in our present climate of lots of people working from home, there's lots of these like Zoom meetings, team meetings, and so on. That people are so they're getting more done in some respects, but they're realizing as well they're missing that time, that commute time, to be able to process the day or prepare themselves for the day.
yeah,
And I thought it's an interesting point that where this individual says that is their time, and rather than car share, it's their time to really process things.
yeah,
It's I know it's a big frustration with a lot of people who would ordinarily commute to work. I know more and more are now beginning to sort of go back
yeah.
into the workplace, but that was one of those things that people would talk about, that they recognised themselves they were missing that
Mhm,
commute and that ability to process the time out. And so I suppose really now then, if you are working from home,
mhm.
is to actually factor into your schedule for the day, or schedule. I'm not an American, am I? For our American friends.
Yeah,
But it's scheduling into the day actual time. And like you say, it doesn't have to be a lot, like just a few minutes.
yeah,
Just time for you, time to think, time to process. When
yeah.
you finish that phone call or that Zoom meeting or whatever virtual meeting that you've been in, just taking a moment out to just process. Maybe go and get a drink, just get up and walk around, go out into the garden or something like that, and just have a breather.
Yeah. And it only has to be a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a really long chunk of time. It's just a
Yeah,
few minutes just to have that. Do you know, I've found myself doing this. I'll be more conscious of it because for me, when I'm on a working from home day, if I'm picking the children up from school, I'll literally finish my last meeting, close my laptop, straight in the car and to school. And I've not had that kind of
yeah,
thinking space. And I'm kind of on the school run, my head's all a blur, and then you've got the children talking at you, and you don't realize, you kind of just get on with it. And what I've
yeah,
started doing, and it's not every single day, but on a Friday now, at the end of my working day on a Friday, I
yeah,
actually block that last hour out to tie up any loose ends, do my plan for the following week, so that then when I finish on the Friday, I know that I don't have to think about work for the weekend. And I found that
yeah.
makes a huge difference.
That's a really good idea, is that? Because I think the worst thing, if you've had a busy week and
Mhm.
then you come to the weekend and all you're doing over the weekend is thinking about your work, you're actually not having time out. You're not resting, and then you're back into it again the following week. Yeah, I get that completely. In terms of, I'm just thinking from an employer point of view, because one of the issues that we find, even though we'll talk about on general terms mental health issues or financial well-being, when it comes down to the nitty gritty of recognizing, well, what does that mean for the individual, and why can't we talk about it on a personal level? What sort of message do you think you would have for an employer, really to encourage them that perhaps it's in their best interest to engage with the well-being of their employees, but they don't necessarily have to work it out all out themselves? There's
Mhm.
plenty of helps around to support them in it.
Yeah. So first of all, it comes down to culture.
Yeah,
This is something when I'm training, for instance, a group of mental health first aiders, it's for them to start thinking, what does this look like? You're there for people to talk to, you can encourage the conversations, but if the current culture is a really long way from that, you can't
yeah,
expect people to suddenly just start opening up. So it would be looking at, so what opportunities can we create where we can keep that open communication going, where people feel that it is a safe space? Because there is still that stigma, that fear of being judged. If somebody is struggling, am I going to get overlooked for promotion? When you look in particular jobs, if you've got, say, a group of trainees or apprentices where they're in that environment, if you take the legal sector as an example, you might have a large number of people and there's only a limited number of jobs at the end of the program, for instance. There's more reluctance for them to open up. They feel that I've got to look like I'm performing and I'm capable and I'm competent and I know what I'm doing. And almost all of this aspiration to be superhuman, but it can make it really difficult in those types of environments for people to talk. So it's having regular check-ins, but genuine, not just doing it for like a token tick box exercise.
I think that can be the worst. And the thing is, it's interesting that people are not daft. They recognise those tick box exercises. So even though we're going through that process, like for example, saying I want to support my staff. Can you do something for an hour over lunch? And you're thinking, how is that supporting your staff? Because actually, they could be really looking forward to that lunch break, and they don't necessarily want to pack it with some kind of training so that you can tick a box. So that I might sound harsh to an employer, and I don't mean to be that, because I know that it's a real challenge for employers, and it probably keeps them awake at times. How do I look after my employees? But actually engaging with somebody who can actually help them through the process, whether it's somebody like yourself with regards to the focus around mental health and what kind of things an employee can do to support good mental health within the workplace, or recognize when somebody is struggling, and be able to create an environment where people feel able to talk without any form of condemnation or affecting their future career in that environment.
And I think as well, it's that knowing that help is available. You hear a lot of negative sort of messages that there is no help and support for people struggling with the mental health, that waiting lists for counselling, it can take months and months and months. What's the point in even trying? And the newspaper headlines then, they also share that similar message that we're in a mental health crisis. And that also has two effects. A, it either means that people don't bother seeking the help because they just think, what's the point? It's not there. But B, if you're somebody who isn't in a position where you're thinking it's really bad, a lot of people think that they don't warrant getting that help. So then they don't try and get it because they think that, well, there's lots of people that are worse off than me, so I shouldn't be taking up that extra space. So it can also deter people from trying as well. So that's a real challenge. And I hear it again and again and again when I'm training people, and they'll say, well, what help is available? And I think there's two aspects to this as well, because people struggle with their mental health for lots and lots of different reasons. And for some, it might be something that's more specific. For instance, it might be that they're struggling with their finances. They might be struggling with debt. Or it could be that they've experienced a bereavement, as another example. Or it could be that they've got a gambling addiction. That actually you can start to signpost very specific help. It's not just general mental health support, very specific help. But you've got to have the conversation to understand what the key drivers are. But there are some amazing organisations out there that are geared up to help people in all of these different aspects. And for me, the other side of it, actually through the NHS, is IAPT, improving access to psychological therapies. And this is where a person can self-refer online. And this is if you're kind of experiencing some of the signs of, depression or anxiety. And to give you an example around how quick this can be. So I know somebody, they completed the self-assessment form on a weekend. They had a call on the Monday by lunchtime. to book them in for an initial assessment, which could have been the next day. However, they couldn't meet that because they were due to work commitments. It ended up being the Thursday of that week. And then within a week from that initial assessment, they were accessing cognitive behavioural therapy, and they were in a program getting the help that they needed. And because they'd not got to the point where it was very severe, they were in a position where they could self-manage it and work through the various modules. And this is where, when I'm encouraging people to get help early, if you're in a position where you can do that self-help, then it can be incredibly effective, and it prevents it from getting to the point where, you do need a professional and you're not necessarily in a position.
Certainly. Yeah. I really appreciate that, Jen. I'm just conscious that time has passed us by. But I think the points that you raised, specifically about getting help sooner rather than later, help is available, and you'd be surprised how quickly you can access that help, and not to be so bogged down in what you perceive as being stigma if you are actually struggling, but recognizing that the fact that even though there may be other people, you are just as important.
Yes.
And I think one of the things about that is often people's self-esteem, thinking themselves lesser than another person, when in actual fact they are really, really important, and so they mustn't think that way, and understand that they're just as much entitled to the same level of help as anybody else. For an employer, it's there are ways and means in which an employer can actually support their workforce without going through what seemingly is a tick box exercise. They could genuinely support them, and the impact on the business can be quite profound. If people are struggling, they will notice a drop off on their productivity and people's engagement, or even being off sick because of stress related illnesses and things like this. To be able to,
they might not report the real reason for that as well.
Yes,
that is a prime example.
I had one employer say to me, I'd asked them, had they done any research internally to find out what their employees actually really needed with regards to support, well-being support, and they said, well, we've looked through the data of those who were absent. And I says, oh, right, and what did you look at? Well, we just looked at the reasons for why they're absent, and nobody needs any financial well-being. Everybody's okay on that. And I just thought, you've actually missed the point, and it's almost like, dare I say it, I'm going to be quite controversial here, and that is, they were deceiving themselves. They were maybe creating a narrative that told them, we don't need to spend any money here. Everything's hunky-dory, and people will just keep going. And actually, eventually, people will start leaving. They say people don't leave businesses or companies, they leave managers. And if managers don't take care of their employees, learn how to do that, or at least bring in some expertise to help them do that, then eventually they are going to start losing their employees. They're going to go somewhere else. So
agreed. Yeah.
So in terms of anybody who has any questions from this podcast, how could they get hold of you, Jen?
So you can access my website, and there's a contact us page on the website at flourishinmind.co.uk. Or direct email jennifer.rawlinson@flourishingmind.co.uk.
Brilliant. Jen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the things that you've shared. I'm sure it will give our listeners some food for thought, and hopefully some people will feel more comfortable at being able to respond, ask for help, or seek a professional support, be it to be able to help others. So, Jen, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot, Bill.
Okay, you take care.
Thank you.